They laughed at me in court when my salary was read out loud. My husband watched, his family smiled, and the woman he replaced me with sat proudly beside him. They thought I was weak, dependent, and finished. What none of them knew was that the office job I kept quiet about wasn't employment. It was ownership, and the truth they mocked was about to destroy everything they planned against me. My name is Violet, and before everything fell apart, I truly believed love was enough. I met my husband at a time when neither of us was chasing status or perfection. What we shared felt honest and steady, the kind of connection that grows quietly but deeply. When he asked me to marry him, I said yes without hesitation, even though I knew his family would never welcome me easily. From the very beginning, his family made their disapproval clear. They were proud, cold, and deeply obsessed with class and appearances. Every conversation somehow turned into a comparison: who earned more, who belonged to which circle, who mattered. To them, people were not measured by kindness or character, but by labels and lifestyle. And in their eyes, I came with neither. I worked, I lived simply, and I never tried to impress them. That alone was enough for them to decide I was beneath their standards. They looked at me and saw a woman with an ordinary job and an ordinary life. They never asked deeper questions, never cared to understand who I really was. And when they did ask what I did for work, I gave them the simplest answer possible. I told them I worked at an office. Nothing more, nothing less. Hiding my real identity was not about shame. It was a choice I made with intention. I wanted a marriage built on love, not leverage. I wanted to be accepted as a wife, not evaluated as an asset. I believed that if my husband truly loved me, the rest would eventually soften with time. There were moments when I felt hopeful. Small gestures, brief smiles, quiet dinners that felt almost normal. I held on to those moments tightly, convincing myself that patience and kindness would be enough. I didn't realize then that silence, to people like them, didn't look like grace. It looked like weakness. The years after our wedding passed quietly, but not gently. 4 years of marriage taught me how heavy silence can become when it's filled with unspoken judgment. I learned how to smile while being measured, how to stay calm while being dismissed, and how to protect my peace while living among people who never wanted me there in the first place. When my daughter was born, I believed everything would change. Holding her for the first time softened something deep inside me. I thought motherhood would melt their coldness, that a child would bridge the distance they had placed between us. For a brief moment it seemed possible. They admired her, praised her beauty, spoke of her future. But their warmth never truly reached me. I remained the woman they tolerated, not the woman they respected. The comments never stopped. They were small, sharp, and constant. Questions about my salary disguised as concern, suggestions about better matches disguised as jokes, advice about how lucky I was to marry into their family, as if love had been charity. I heard it all and responded with silence. I told myself I was being strong. I told myself I was choosing my family over my ego. My husband began to change too. Slowly at first. Less conversation, more distance. He stopped defending me when his family crossed lines. Then he stopped noticing when I withdrew. I still left for work every morning the same way. Simple clothes, quiet goodbye, steady routine. To them, it confirmed everything they believed about me. What none of them knew was that my silence wasn't weakness. It was control. I had built a life before them, and I was still building it quietly every day. I chose not to correct their assumptions. I chose not to reveal the truth. I believed protecting my marriage meant protecting my privacy. But living under constant judgment takes a toll. Some nights, after everyone was asleep, I would sit beside my daughter's crib and remind myself why I stayed calm. For her. For the life I wanted her to grow up seeing, one where dignity mattered more than approval. I didn't know then that my patience was being mistaken for permission, and my silence for surrender. Every morning I left the house the same way. No announcements, no display, just a quiet routine that fit perfectly into the story they had already written about me. I dressed simply, gathered my bag, kissed my daughter goodbye, and walked out as if I were just another woman heading to a regular job. To them, it was proof that they were right about me all along. When they asked where I worked, I always gave the same answer. An office. I never changed the words, never added details. It was enough to satisfy their curiosity and vague enough to protect my truth. They never asked which office, what position I held, or how long I had been there. People who think they already know everything rarely ask real questions. That office was not just a workplace, it was something I had built long before I met my husband. Years of late nights, careful decisions, and risks taken quietly. I had learned early that true power doesn't announce itself. It moves quietly, grows patiently, and protects itself until the moment it's needed. I never felt the need to explain that to anyone, especially not to people who measured worth by noise and display. Inside those walls, my voice mattered. Decisions were made because of me. People listened. But when I came home, I stepped back into a version of myself that felt smaller, almost invisible. I did it deliberately. I wanted balance. I wanted love without conditions. I wanted my home to be a place where I could just be a wife and a mother, not a symbol of success. There were days when the contrast felt heavy. Walking from authority into dismissal was not easy, but I reminded myself that I was choosing this. I was choosing privacy over pride, peace over recognition. I believed that eventually my consistency and patience would earn respect on their own. What I didn't realize was that by allowing them to underestimate me, I was also allowing them to cross boundaries they would never have dared to cross if they knew the truth. They mistook simplicity for limitation. They mistook quiet for weakness, and they never once considered that the woman they looked down on every day was the same woman controlling the world they admired from a distance. I started to feel the shift before I ever had proof. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, almost polite. My husband grew quieter, his presence thinner, like he was slowly stepping out of a life he no longer wanted to explain. Conversations became short. Eye contact faded. He spent more time on his phone, more time away from home, and less time asking about my day. At first, I blamed myself. I told myself marriage goes through phases, that exhaustion and routine can dull even the strongest love. I was raising a toddler, managing work, holding the household together, and still trying to be patient with a family that never truly accepted me. I believed if I stayed calm and kind, things would eventually return to what they were. Then his family changed too. They suddenly had a new energy, new smiles, new excitement. They spoke in half sentences around me, stopped including me in conversations, and went quiet whenever I entered the room. I noticed the way his mother compared me to women from better backgrounds, always followed by a soft laugh, as if it were harmless. I didn't know her name then, but I felt her presence. Someone else had entered my marriage long before I saw her face. My husband began dressing differently when he went out. He cared more about appearances, about impressions. He criticized my simplicity now, something he once said he admired. What hurt the most was not just his distance, but his silence. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He simply withdrew, leaving me to fill the gaps with doubt. I still held on to hope. I still believed that 4 years of marriage, shared struggles, and a child would mean something. I didn't know that his family had already chosen for him. They believed love should be replaced when it stops being impressive, and in their eyes, I was no longer impressive. I was practical, predictable, replaceable. I was still walking into that office every day carrying a power none of them could imagine. And yet, in my own home, I was becoming a stranger, quietly pushed aside, while someone else was being prepared to take my place. That day began like any other. Nothing warned me that my life was about to split into a before and an after. I left home in the morning, kissed my daughter, and stepped into my routine with the same quiet focus I had carried for years. But by midday, something shifted. A meeting ended sooner than expected, decisions were made faster than planned, and for the first time in a long while, I found myself free earlier than usual. I didn't call ahead, I didn't think twice, I just went home. As I opened the door, the first thing I noticed was the sound of laughter. Not polite laughter, not casual conversation. It was loud, careless, celebratory. It didn't belong to a normal afternoon. For a moment, I stood still, trying to understand why my home felt unfamiliar, like I had walked into someone else's life. Then I saw them. My husband was there, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months. His family sat around him, smiling freely, animated, alive. And standing among them was a woman I had never seen before. She moved comfortably, confidently, as if she belonged there, as if she had always belonged there. No one looked surprised to see her. No one looked guilty. The room went quiet when they noticed me, not shocked, not apologetic, just interrupted. I remember how calm I felt in that moment, which surprised even me. My heart was racing, but my voice stayed steady when I asked a simple question. Who is she? No one rushed to answer. Then his mother spoke, her tone casual, almost proud. She said the words as if they were obvious, as if I should have known. She said this woman was the one he loved, the one meant for him, the one who fit their world. I felt the ground disappear beneath me, not because of the woman, but because of the ease with which they erased me. I looked at my husband, waiting for denial, for discomfort, for something human. He didn't meet my eyes. In that moment, I understood something painful and clear. This wasn't betrayal discovered too early. This was betrayal that had been planned, rehearsed, and welcomed. And my silence, my patience, my sacrifice, none of it had protected me at all. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The room felt heavy, like the air itself had stopped moving. I stood there trying to understand how calmly they had delivered something so cruel. I wasn't screaming, I wasn't crying. I was simply standing in my own home, realizing I had already been replaced. I asked the question that came from somewhere deeper than pride. I asked what would happen to us, to me, to our daughter. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't accuse anyone. I just needed to hear him acknowledge that we had a life, that we mattered. He finally spoke. His words were cold, efficient, almost rehearsed. He said he wanted a divorce. He said it like a decision already finalized, not a discussion. Then he added something that still echoes in my mind. He said he didn't need me anymore, not as a wife, not as a partner. And when I mentioned our daughter, he paused only briefly before saying she would be fine without me. That sentence broke something inside me, not loudly, but completely. It wasn't anger I felt, it was clarity. The kind that arrives when hope finally gives up. I looked around the room again and realized there was no shock on their faces because this moment wasn't new to them. It was only new to me. His mother spoke again, explaining things as if she were doing me a favor. She said this was better for everyone, that I should be practical, that love alone wasn't enough to build a future. I understood then that in their world, love was optional, but status was not. I didn't beg. I didn't argue. I held myself together because my daughter needed me to. I nodded, slowly, and told them we would let the court decide. My voice didn't shake, even though everything inside me was collapsing. As I walked away from that room, I realized something painful and powerful at the same time. They thought they were ending my life. What they were really doing was forcing me to stop protecting them from the truth about who I was. The next morning, everything moved fast. Too fast. Papers were prepared, calls were made, and suddenly my life was reduced to documents and signatures. There was no space for conversation, no attempt at dignity. The divorce was not just a separation, it was a performance they were eager to stage. His family took control immediately. They spoke with confidence, as if the outcome was already decided. They told relatives, shared their version of the story, and painted me as a woman who had been lucky for too long, a woman who should quietly step aside now that someone better had arrived. I heard about it through whispers and sideways glances. No one came to ask me what had happened. They wanted the court to see me the way they did, small, replaceable, dependent. They wanted my worth reduced to numbers that would embarrass me, my salary, my lifestyle, my silence. They believed humiliation would force me to settle quickly, to accept whatever they offered just to make the discomfort stop. The woman he chose never missed a chance to be visible. She appeared confident, well-dressed, and carefully placed beside him. His family welcomed her openly, proudly. It was clear they wanted the comparison to hurt. They wanted me to feel outmatched, outdated, erased. I stayed quiet through it all. Not because I was afraid, but because I was watching. I saw how easily cruelty became entertainment when people felt superior. I saw how quickly love was rewritten when it no longer served their image. And I understood that this was never about the end of a marriage. It was about power. They believed the courtroom would be the place where I would finally be exposed and defeated. They believed I would stand there embarrassed, holding my child, unable to defend myself. They mistook my calm for fear and my silence for surrender. But while they were preparing to destroy me publicly, I was preparing to stop hiding privately. I contacted my lawyer, not to negotiate peace, but to present truth. Every document was ready, every detail organized, not for revenge, but for justice. They walked into that courtroom confident, smiling, certain of victory. I walked in holding my daughter, calm and steady, knowing that the story they planned to tell was about to collapse under the weight of facts they never bothered to ask for. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature but in feeling. Every sound echoed, the shuffle of papers, the clearing of throats, the quiet confidence of people who believed they were in control. I took my seat holding my daughter close, her small fingers wrapped around mine, grounding me in a moment that felt unreal. When my income was mentioned, the change in the room was immediate. A few quiet laughs escaped before anyone tried to hide them. Smirks followed. Whispers passed from one side of the room to the other, sharp and careless. I felt their eyes on me, weighing me, reducing me to a number they thought defined my entire existence. His lawyer leaned into it comfortably, repeating the figure as if it were proof of something shameful. A modest salary, ordinary, unimpressive. They spoke as though they were doing the court a favor by revealing how little I was worth. My husband didn't stop them. He didn't look at me. The woman beside him smiled, satisfied, as if she had already won. His family didn't bother hiding their reactions. There was amusement on their faces, relief even. This was the moment they had waited for. The moment I would finally be exposed as exactly what they had always believed I was, a woman with nothing to offer but silence and dependence. I felt my chest tighten, not with fear, but with disbelief at how easily people celebrate cruelty when it benefits them. I could have spoken then. I could have corrected them, ended it immediately. But I didn't. I stayed still. I listened. I let them finish telling the story they were so proud of. My lawyer sat quietly beside me, calm and attentive. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react. He simply waited. And that waiting unsettled them more than any argument could have. They kept talking, kept pushing, unaware that every word was making what came next more devastating. As the laughter faded and the whispers died down, the judge asked if there was anything else to add. For the first time, the room fell silent. I felt my daughter shift in my arms, and I kissed her hair softly. This was the moment they thought they had broken me. What they didn't know was that this was the last moment they would ever look down on me again. Silence filled the courtroom, heavy and expectant. It was the kind of silence that feels temporary, like the calm before something breaks. I could feel their confidence settling in, the quiet satisfaction of people who believed the worst was over, for them. They thought I had nothing left to say. That was when my lawyer stood up. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked forward and placed a thick file on the table. The sound it made echoed sharply, cutting through the stillness. Papers shifted inside it, heavy and deliberate. I watched as attention moved instantly toward that file. Confusion replaced amusement, Curiosity replaced certainty. My lawyer spoke calmly, requesting the court's permission to submit additional documentation. His tone was professional, controlled. There was no drama in his words, yet the room changed. The judge nodded, and the file was opened. One page became two became several. The judge leaned forward, reading carefully. The longer he read, the more serious his expression became. The whispers did not return. No one laughed now. Even the air felt different. I saw my husband shift in his seat. The woman beside him straightened, her smile fading as uncertainty crept across her face. His family leaned forward, trying to read from where they sat, their confidence beginning to crack. The documents spoke where I had stayed silent. They outlined ownership, investments, and holdings built over years. Not guesses, not claims, facts, stamped, verified, undeniable. Everything they believed about me began to unravel quietly, one page at a time. I didn't smile. I didn't react. I simply held my daughter and watched the truth do its work. There was something deeply satisfying about letting reality speak without explanation. I had spent years being underestimated. Now, that same underestimation was working in my favor. The judge paused, looked up, and asked for clarification. My lawyer answered smoothly, confirming details they had never bothered to question. The courtroom felt smaller now, tighter. The story had shifted, and everyone could feel it. That file didn't just change the case, it changed how every person in that room saw me. And for the first time since I walked in, I felt something lift from my chest. Not relief, but certainty. The truth was finally in the open, and there was no putting it back. The judge was still reviewing the documents when I felt it was time. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but because there are moments when silence has already done its job, and words, simple, clear words, must finish it. I reached for the file gently and stood up. Every movement felt steady, deliberate. I walked a few steps forward and placed the file directly in front of my husband and the woman sitting beside him. My voice was calm when I spoke. I didn't raise it. I didn't need to. Read this. Just 2 words. No explanation, no accusation. For the first time, my husband looked at me properly, not past me, not through me, at me. His confidence wavered as he opened the file. Page after page, his expression changed. Confusion gave way to disbelief. Disbelief turned into panic. I watched his hands tighten around the papers as the reality settled in. The woman beside him leaned in, her curiosity quickly replaced by fear. The color drained from her face as she realized what those pages meant. This wasn't a salary slip. This wasn't a small detail they could laugh away. This was ownership, control, power, everything they had assumed I lacked. His family reacted next. I could see it in their eyes before they spoke. Regret rushed in where arrogance had lived for years. The same people who once dismissed me now struggled to process the truth. The woman they had mocked, measured, and replaced was the one holding everything they respected. I looked down at my daughter in my arms. She was calm, unaware of the storm shifting around her. And in that moment, I knew I had done the right thing by waiting, by protecting her from chaos, by choosing dignity over drama. I didn't tell them who I was. I didn't explain how long I had carried this truth quietly. I let the documents speak. They said enough. That was my revenge. Not shouting, not humiliation, not cruelty. Just truth, delivered calmly, at the exact moment it could no longer be ignored. The room felt different after that. Not quieter, heavier, as if the weight of their own assumptions had finally settled on them. My husband sat frozen, the file still open in his hands, his eyes moving over the pages again as if rereading them might change what they said. It didn't. Facts don't bend for denial. His family looked at me the way people do when a story they told themselves collapses all at once. Shock came first, then confusion, then something close to fear. The same faces that once looked down on me now searched for answers they had never bothered to ask. I could almost hear the thoughts racing behind their eyes. How long? How much? How wrong were we? The woman beside my husband slowly leaned back, creating distance as if proximity alone could harm her. Her confidence evaporated. The smile she had worn so comfortably was gone, replaced by a tight stillness. She avoided my eyes. I didn't look at her either. She was never the point. She was only a symptom of something far uglier. My husband finally spoke, but his voice sounded unfamiliar to me, thin, uncertain. He asked questions that no longer mattered. He wanted explanations, context, reassurance. I gave him none. There was nothing left to clarify. Everything he needed to know was written clearly in front of him. For years, they had believed I stayed quiet because I had no choice. Now they understood the truth. I stayed quiet because I chose to. I watched realization spread through the room as they grasped how completely they had misjudged me. Not just my finances, but my strength, my patience, my control. The judge cleared his throat, bringing everyone back to the present. Authority returned to the room, but the balance had already shifted. I felt calm, steadier than I had felt in years, not because I had proven something, but because I no longer needed to protect anyone from the consequences of their behavior. I held my daughter closer and realized this was the moment everything changed. They finally saw me. Not as the woman they could mock or replace, but as the woman who had been standing quietly above them the entire time. Once the truth was fully laid out, there was no room left for performance. The courtroom returned to order, but the power had already shifted. The judge reviewed the documents again, slowly, carefully, making sure every detail was clear and recorded. This was no longer a case built on assumptions or appearances. It was now grounded in facts that could not be ignored. My husband tried to speak, but his words came out disorganized, almost desperate. He attempted to explain himself, to reframe his choices, to soften what had already been exposed. It didn't work. The confidence he once carried into that room was gone, replaced by uncertainty and regret. The woman beside him stayed silent, her presence suddenly irrelevant. The judge asked direct questions about intentions, about honesty, about responsibility. For the first time, my husband had no convincing answers. The story he and his family had prepared fell apart under simple scrutiny. What they had framed as strength now looked like cruelty. What they had called logic now sounded like convenience. When the decision was announced, it came with clarity and finality. The divorce was granted on my terms. Full custody of my daughter was awarded to me without hesitation. The court acknowledged the emotional harm done, the imbalance of power, and the deliberate attempt to humiliate me. There was no sympathy extended to betrayal disguised as confidence. I didn't feel the rush of victory people talk about. What I felt was something quieter and deeper. Relief. Not because I had won, but because I was free. Free from defending myself. Free from explaining my worth. Free from a family that never wanted to see me clearly. As I stood to leave, holding my daughter close, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The judgment wasn't just legal, it was personal. The chapter they tried to end for me had instead closed on them. I walked out of that courtroom the same way I had walked in, calm, composed, and silent. The difference was this: I no longer carried the weight of being underestimated. They had seen the truth too late, and I was finally done protecting them from it. When I walked out of that courtroom, I expected to feel something loud: anger, satisfaction, triumph. But what settled over me instead was a deep, steady calm. The kind that comes when a long storm finally passes and you realize you survived it without becoming someone you don't recognize. My husband didn't follow me. Neither did his family. They stayed behind, trapped in the aftermath of their own choices. For years, they believed power meant control, noise, and dominance. That day, they learned something different. They learned that silence, when chosen, can be devastating. I never raised my voice. I never insulted them. I never exposed the truth until the exact moment it was necessary. That was my revenge. Not humiliation, but clarity. Not cruelty, but consequences. I let them sit with the full weight of what they lost, not just me, but the version of me they never bothered to see. Outside, the world felt lighter. The air was the same. the streets unchanged, yet everything inside me had shifted. I looked down at my daughter, her head resting peacefully against my shoulder, and I felt proud. Not because I had power, but because I had protected it, protected her, protected myself. For years I had been told, directly and indirectly, that I should be grateful. Grateful to be chosen, grateful to be tolerated, grateful to stay quiet. Walking away that day, I realized I owed them nothing. Gratitude without respect is just another form of control. I didn't look back because closure doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from knowing you no longer need answers from people who never valued the questions. My silence after that day wasn't weakness. It was boundaries. It was peace. They would spend years replaying that moment, wondering how they missed it, how they underestimated me so completely. I didn't need to be there for that. My life was already moving forward. My revenge wasn't loud. It didn't need witnesses. It lived in my calm, my freedom, and the quiet knowledge that I walked away with everything that truly mattered. My dignity intact, my daughter beside me, and my future entirely my own. Time passed after that day, but the truth I revealed didn't fade with it. I returned to my life quietly, the same way I had always lived, focused, intentional, grounded. The difference was that I no longer carried the burden of being misunderstood. I didn't need to explain myself anymore. The people who mattered knew the truth, and the ones who didn't were no longer part of my world. I often think about how easily people confuse silence with weakness, how quickly they assume simplicity means limitation. I lived that lesson for years, watched it shape how others treated me, and saw how cruel it could become when paired with entitlement. But I also learned something powerful in return. Underestimation is dangerous, not for the person being underestimated, but for the ones doing it. My daughter grew in a home filled with calm, not tension. She grew up watching her mother stand steady, not bitter. I wanted her to learn early that worth isn't announced, it's protected. That respect begins with how you allow others to treat you, and that walking away with dignity is sometimes the strongest response of all. I never reached out to my former husband or his family again. There was nothing left to say. The lesson they received didn't require follow-up. It lived with them now, quietly and permanently. Every time they judged someone too quickly, every time they laughed too easily, every time they assumed they were above someone else. As for me, I continued building, leading, and living on my own terms. Not to prove a point, but because that was always who I was. The empire didn't define me. It reflected me, my discipline, my patience, my refusal to let noise distract me from purpose. If there's one truth my story holds, it's this. Never measure a person by what they choose to show you. Some people hide their strength not out of fear, but out of wisdom. And when the moment comes, the truth doesn't need anger to be powerful. It only needs to be undeniable. I was mocked for my salary, judged for my silence, replaced without shame. But in the end, I walked away with everything that mattered: my child, my peace, and a life no one else ever had the power to take from me. After everything ended, I didn't rebuild my life. I continued it. Nothing had been taken from me that day. What was taken was an illusion I had carried for too long. The belief that love requires endurance of disrespect. The belief that silence must always be explained. I let those ideas go, and in doing so, I stepped fully into a future that was already waiting for me. My days became quieter, but fuller. I focused on my daughter, on raising her in a home where she would never feel small or unwanted. I wanted her to grow up knowing that love should never cost you your dignity, and that strength doesn't always come with noise or force. Sometimes it comes with patience and timing. I returned to my work with clarity, not driven by revenge, but by purpose. Every decision I made now came from confidence, not caution. I no longer hid who I was, but I didn't announce it either. I let my life speak for itself. They lost the right to witness my growth. They lost access to my peace. And that was the final boundary I set. My story didn't end in that courtroom. It began there. Not as a woman proving her worth, but as a woman who finally stopped letting others define it. I moved forward, knowing one truth would always protect me. When you choose dignity over reaction, you never really lose anything at all.
Thank you for listening to this story until the end. Hopefully every moment, every detail in the story has brought you emotions, thoughts, and maybe a little joy or motivation. Thank you for spending time with us, and hope that the next stories will continue to accompany you and touch your heart.